Tonight, you will sleep.
Welcome, Frodo of the Shire. One who has seen the eye.
Before I start this review, I want to make one thing clear. I'm not a realism snob. Many of my all-time favorite stories are packed with instances of characters breaking the laws of physics, surviving dangerous hazards that absolutely would have killed any normal person, or grappling with cosmic forces that bend the fabric of reality itself. Every story requires suspension of disbelief to an extent, and Lord of the Rings is no exception. Gandalf managing to catch up to his sword when it fell long before he did, Legolas pulling off mind-blowing acrobatics, or occasional stupid ones, and Frodo and Sam managing to not get burnt alive just by being in close proximity to lava. Hell, if we really want to get pedantic, some could argue Frodo and Sam should have died the moment they entered the cavern due to the toxic fumes alone. My point is, I don't need every story to conform to every aspect of realism to enjoy it. So long as the rules are consistent, the characters are compelling, and it never crosses the line into complete absurdism. Well, Rings of Power is a special case, because it not only fails at everything I just described, but it only manages to get even more absurd and ridiculous the further along it goes. The characters have barely evolved past the thin traits that were established about them from the very beginning. If anything, they've devolved into either blander or completely detestable versions of what they originally were across each episode, with the only consistent lesson they all learn is that being a good-natured and noble person doesn't get you anywhere, and to accomplish your goals, you have to be willing to backstab and manipulate others for what you believe to be the greater good. Believe me, I'm not exaggerating at all, and you're about to see in this episode how characters not only face any consequences for their actions, but learn the worst possible lessons from them, and in some cases, become more villainous than the characters we're supposed to root against. Let's get into it. Things get off to a rough start when we see warrior Guyladriel wake up in the aftermath of Mount Doom's eruption, completely unscathed despite the fiery carnage around her. Nobody in this area should even be alive, and nothing would be left standing, as this scale representation of Pompeii's destruction demonstrates. What really gets me is that we saw Guyladriel take the pyroclastic flow head-on, as it decimated entire trees, buildings, and people in the last episode and across this one, but she hasn't so much just singed her hair.
But the deadliest characteristics of a pyroclastic flow are heat and speed. They can move at 50 miles an hour and reach temperatures of 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. That kind of all-consuming heat can effectively flash fry a person to death. It causes a person's bodily fluids to boil instantaneously, including those inside their brain, essentially causing their head to explode. Within 10 minutes, all the soft tissue on their body would vaporize.
You're welcome to take issue with Frodo and Sam surviving Mount Doom's eruption at its base, but that was nowhere near as ridiculous and unbelievable as this. You can't even use the argument that it's just elf magic, because Theo, Tamriel, Isildur, his lieutenant friend, and a handful of others all survived as well, and I think it's safe to say that the only thing that was protecting all of them was full-blown plot armor. So Guyladriel joins Theo in his search for his mother and the other named characters in this show because no one cares about the dying civilians around them, and it turns out Isildur's other friend is dead after Tamriel helps the two of them lift an entire house. Ah well, rest in peace I guess. The only things I knew about you is that you were an agreeable yes man and weren't cut out to be a soldier in the first place. They rushed to save a group of civilians trapped inside a burning house, who all decided instead of trying to break apart the loose boards covering the doorway, they'd all rather huddle in a corner and wait to either choke to death from the ashes both inside and outside the house, or just let the collapsing roof crush all of them. Isildur was forced to hold up the entire collapsing structure while Tamriel escorts them out, as her guards watch uselessly by the doorway. I guess they weren't paid enough to care about their queen's well-being. She gets some cinder splashed into her eyes as the building collapses, and the show pathetically tries to bait Isildur might be dead, even though every Tolkien and movie fan knows full well he's going to live to found the Kingdom of Gondor with his father, and do this little thing called defeat the Dark Lord Sauron and take the One Ring for himself. Yes, the Two Towers also baited that Aragorn died, but as you're about to see, it didn't drag it out or make it as overbearing as this episode's going to with Isildur's supposed death. Don't worry about that for now, because it's time to cut to the most evil characters in all of the Rings of Power.
One day so fine, he found 100 big ones. I wish that they were mine.
Stop that. You're not going into a song while I'm here.
Say what you want about Adar, at least he didn't abandon his orcs or force the audience to listen to poorly written songs. We see they've reached the orchard, and at last, something in the main plot affects the Harfoot story.
What happened?
My great-grand used to speak of mountains to the south that could spit fire rock.
Honestly, this doesn't look that bad. Outside of this one burnt patch, you can see how vibrant everything else is. But I guess we can chalk that up to the visuals not lining up with the melodrama in the script again. Discount Bilbo wants Nori to ask Discount Gandalf to fix the orchard with his magic, because after the last episode, he now has no problem with him staying with their tribe, even though it was because Nori helped him in the first place that he tried to abandon her and her family to die behind them. She doesn't want to do it though, because now she thinks he may be evil, even though it was entirely her fault that she got frozen and knocked backward in the last episode, and he's done nothing but help them ever since. The show desperately tries to make it out like Nori has good reason to not trust him, but doesn't seem to realize it just makes her look ungrateful and stupid after everything she did for him, and how it just took one little misunderstanding that was entirely her fault for her to turn against him completely. The only times characters in the Rings of Power actually develop is when it's off-screen, and it makes no sense for them to be acting that way, but of course, it's all for another contrived plot point to happen. Just like this. Why are you all standing right there? You saw firsthand his magic has a wide area of effect, and for all you know, this could take hours if not the entire day. If Nori's really so afraid of him, why didn't she tell anybody his magic can be dangerous? And why is she standing so close to him after what happened last time?
He's fixing it, just like Psychopathic.
It's because another contrived plot point had to happen, and it's too much for these writers to make their characters the least bit smart or rational. So now the Harfoots don't trust him again, which easily could have been avoided if Nori just opened her mouth and warned them, but it seems she's become just as big of an asshole as the rest of her people. Also, don't these people eat snails too? Surely there would still be plenty to harvest around here, and therefore no need to kick out Discount Gandalf because he couldn't revive this one tree, especially after he saved all of them from wolves the other episode. Well, forget all that for now, because we're moving on to Femrod and Durin asking his father to allow them to mine Mithril so they can save all of the elves.
The elves are prepared to furnish this city with game, grain, and timber from the elder forests of Eriador.
You're not throwing in any elven swords or armor too? I would think offering the services of your master blacksmith Guyladriel would also be a massive bargaining chip, especially since he's meant to be a friend of the dwarves too. Anyway, the other dwarves are skeptical that Femrod will even keep his promise, but he assures them he's not like other elves, despite admitting to Durin that he was sent to Khazad-dûm as a spy, and has been trying to manipulate the dwarves to be a part of Guyladriel's project since the beginning. King Durin sends everyone outside so he can talk over the idea with his son, but it's mainly just to give a long-rounded no.
The rock that lives within us hungers for the eternal, resisting the pull of time. But the fire embraces the truth that all things must one day be consumed.
As metaphors in this show go, that was decent, but I really wish these characters would just be more direct with each other. Durin becomes very emotional over the elves losing their immortality, and there's the biggest problem with this entire plotline. For one thing, the elves aren't really dying, but just becoming mortal like every other race in Middle-earth, so that doesn't give this plot much urgency. Secondly, how exactly is Mithril going to stop this illness? Do they just have to stick a truckload into the tree, and that's somehow going to instantly preserve every elf across the world? Do the elves have to wear Mithril for the rest of their lives? Or does some arbitrary amount instantly cure this disease forever? Thirdly, why doesn't the king care that everybody seems to know about Mithril when he was so insistent about keeping it a secret at the ending of episode 2? I could understand if he refused the proposal because his son clearly told the elves their secret, but he never brings it up. His argument for protecting dwarven lives would make more sense if we actually got to see the cave-in a few episodes ago, but there's still enough evidence to prove it would be a dangerous process, and helping the elves cheat death isn't worth endangering his people, like he said. The show wants to make out Durin's father to be unreasonable and bullheaded, but his logic makes perfect sense, whereas Durin's is overblown and doesn't take into account the risks behind it, the hallmark of any bad leader. To be fair, Durin's father should specify exactly what kind of danger it would pose, but he still ends up being justified for what he does later on this episode, and Durin himself looks more like a despondent, power-crazy upstart than a compassionate friend. Speaking of power-crazy...
Rice-bearded, uncaring old fool!
What if he's right?
You're not thinking of letting this happen!
Yeah, that completely caught me off guard as well. I thought Disa was the one who cared so much about the safety of dwarves that she sang to the rocks to release the ones who got trapped several episodes ago. But now she's willing to risk putting them all in danger just to get the mithril? When exactly did Disa go from Kitty Foreman to Gemma Teller? Thankfully, Durin talks her down this time, but trust me, her Lady Macbeth streak is only just beginning. Fenrir decides to leave to go tell Gilgalad they won't be immortal anymore, but will still be very much alive, so this isn't nearly as impactful as this scene tries to make it out to be. He gives Durin back the mithril ore, tells him goodbye while also trying to act like saying Namare doesn't also mean goodbye, so it's just a waste of time, and departs. I'm not sure why he left that leaf there, but I guess it's convenient for the plot. Also, I don't know why you're so surprised, because this is the exact reason you wanted the mithril in the first place, and nothing's changed about your situation. But never mind all that pesky logic in the way of this melodrama, because we're cutting back to Guyladriel and Theo, sitting in the ruins of the Southlands. This is another prime example of every character in this episode doing a complete 180, because Theo's the one who wants to go after the orcs, but Guyladriel of all people holds him back for a reason that doesn't make any sense at all.
Steal down their throats. It's over. Not for me. I won't allow it. You must. What are you so bothered about? It isn't your fault.
Yes, it is.
Look, I'm all for criticizing Warrior Guyladriel for anything. If she's responsible for any terrible action, you can bet I'll be the first one to point it out. But in this case, no, none of this is her fault. It may have been for selfish and egotistical reasons, but all of the Southlanders would be dead if she hadn't brought the Numenorian cavalry. If anyone's to blame, it's Theo for giving Adar the knife, who then had the dirty barkeep use it to create this hellscape. Maybe you could blame her for not being able to tell it was the knife inside the package Adar was carrying, but she wouldn't have been in that situation if Theo hadn't given it up in the first place. At least he acknowledges this, but Guyladriel dismisses his bid to take responsibility with even more absurd logic, which I'll get to in just a minute. For now, we get to see the writers trying to pretend Guyladriel's gone through this big arc, but failing to realize there's been no basis for it whatsoever.
Now, how many have you killed?
Many.
Good.
I would not use such words. It darkens the heart to call dark deeds good. It gives place for evil to thrive inside us. Your kind was a mistake. And even if it takes me all of this age, I vow to eradicate every last one of you.
Yeah, you're going to have to do more than splash Cheeto dust on her to convince me Guyladriel's a better person now. If anything, she should be more determined to kill every last orc now that they have free reign over this entire area. For a show so determined to turn Guyladriel into this stoic commander, they sure are doing everything they can to not justify it, even when they have a ready-made excuse like this. Don't take that to mean she's any less bloodthirsty though, because the moment Theo suggests he wants to be a soldier, she hands him her sword. It's a nice gesture and all, but I don't think it'll do much if the orcs actually attack them, and it only further invalidates that scene of him learning to use a bow with a reindeer. Meanwhile, we learn that Talmira was blind, which is actually pretty funny because her actress barely conveys any emotion that I barely noticed, and Elendil's become teary-eyed because he believes Isildur is still dead. Man, I really do feel bad for this actor, because in a proper Lord of the Rings story, he would definitely fit in. Sadly, Elendil doesn't get to do much in this episode, outside of one shining moment, which I'm sure made me, along with many other fellow critics of Guyladriel, very happy. So Talmiriel wants to keep the fact she's blind a secret to preserve what little morale the men have left. Now we're back with the Harfoots, who waste no time showing their depravity by sending Discount Gandalf away. He turns to Nori, but she's fully embraced her culture of asshole savages, and lets him leave by himself. I should mention that Bear McCreary's music is the only semi-decent part of this entire show, and while it's trying really hard to make this scene emotional, it's just not working because of all the idiocy and contrivance that led up to this point. They're both incredibly flat characters who've barely had any meaningful interactions across this entire first season. She found him, decided to help him because the script told, because it's the right thing to do, insisted he was good based on flimsy evidence, and figured out he isn't so trustworthy because of her idiot mistake. And now she's sending him away to fend for himself after all her declarations that he needed their help. It's not like Nori had much of a character to begin with, but this completely tramples over every decent aspect of her personality that made her more tolerable than the other Harfoots. Well, I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the asshole tree, and I doubt that one apple is going to sustain him across that entire journey, you selfish cow.
I saw that star falling. Should have just let it alone. Eleanor, you tried to tell me, Mother. But now I understand. I'm just a Harfoot.
God, stop talking, all of you. You're not progressing the plot, you're not developing your characters, you're just spouting complete nonsense that isn't as smart as you think it is. How does being a Harfoot preclude you from being a decent person? Ugh, karma will come for you soon enough. I was actually glad when the show cut back to Guyladriel and Theo in the middle of the woods, right up until they started speaking to each other. She tells him the usual sob story about her dead brother, but then adds something very interesting by the end.
And my husband.
Husband?
Celeborn was his name.
At long last, Rings of Power has finally acknowledged Celeborn's existence after 7 entire episodes. I have to wonder how important he was to her, considering how friendly she was getting with Totally Not Sauron.
We met in a glade of flowers. I was dancing and he saw me there.
You were dancing.
The war seemed so very far away then.
That sounds like a nice romance story, but I don't believe Guyladriel here was ever that tender with somebody any more than Theo does.
When he went to it, I chided him. His armor didn't fit properly. Called him a silver clam. I never saw him again after that.
So even this supposed loving and affectionate version of Guyladriel was still nagging people? Are we absolutely sure he was taken by the dark forces and didn't just get out of Dodge while he could? I can't imagine anyone who'd be willing to spend 100 years with Guyladriel, much less 10 minutes. Anyway, Guyladriel tries to sound remorseful, but whether it's up to bad writing, bad direction, bad acting, or a combination of all three, she still can't convey more emotion than a Cylon Centurion. And here it is, the big reason Guyladriel's supposed redemption story doesn't work at all. Theo actually does something right by admitting giving the knife to Adar is what caused all of this, but Guyladriel insists it's not his fault because he never intended for any of this to happen. This line of thinking couldn't be more antithetical to any good redemption story, because they all hinge on a character feeling real remorse for their actions. One of the best redemption stories I've ever seen was Angels, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and his own titular show. His entire arc revolves around making up for all the crimes he committed as the soulless vampire Angelus, before he was cursed with a soul and realized the true horrors of everything he'd done for hundreds of years. His guilt was the driving force behind many of his heroic actions, and tied brilliantly with the overarching theme of his show, that being, is redemption possible for someone like him, and is he even worthy of it?
If there's no great glorious end to all this, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do.
He never tries to deny the horrible things he did as Angelus, but chooses to keep fighting the good fight in the hopes that one day he can make the world around him a better place. Meanwhile, Guyladriel here just decides, you know what, even though I did everything I could to prevent this from happening, and none of my actions are really tied to how this happened in the first place, I'm just going to take the blame for this catastrophe, and encourage the person who was actually responsible to not try to own up to their mistakes, and to even imply it was the will of the Valar that he got his homeland destroyed.
There are powers beyond darkness at work in this world. Perhaps on days such as this, we have little choice but to trust to their designs.
My home is gone. Where's the design in that?
Oh, don't worry, Guyladriel. You and the writers have been spared from answering this logical question because orcs have suddenly appeared. Where they were during the huge battle sequence in the last episode, nobody knows. And I'm sure the writers don't care either, because now it's time to rip off another scene from Lord of the Rings.
Come on. We're wasting time.
I don't think I've ever been as less invested in two major characters of a story than I am with Guyladriel and Theo. So they make it out fine, and we cut back to Femrond and Durin mining Mithril in secret. Wait, what? How are you keeping all these tremors and loud clangs a secret exactly? Every dwarf in Moria should be able to hear this racket. Let's even say they somehow don't notice this, and you manage to find the Mithril. What's the plan then? Are you just going to roll large quantities of it outside of Khazad-dûm and hope nobody notices that either? The two of them are committing treason right now, but their only plan to ensure they don't get caught is hoping everyone in Moria is blind, deaf, and stupid. Whatever. Just don't question how two of the most influential figures in all of Middle-earth are complete idiots, because it's time for another awkward banter scene.
No. You lost on purpose.
My aim was never to defeat you, but to gain your ear a while longer.
Elf lies.
I have to wonder if Durin has Stockholm Syndrome at this point, because it seems like every time Femrond admits he's been lying to him about something, he just brushes it off. I get this is meant to be a joke, but don't forget at the beginning of this series, he was pissed towards Elrond for being a callous and deceitful elf, and that hasn't really changed ever since. It doesn't make sense how these two developed this close friendship when every time we see them on screen, Femrond's usually admitting how he's either been a spy or manipulating Durin to further his own goals. I know the internet's ruined this word, but this really is one of the most toxic, one-sided friendships I've ever seen. Anyway, they find the Mithril, but King Durin finds the two of them. Oh no, how could he possibly have discovered their discreet operation, banging their pickaxes in the dead of night and crumbling parts of the mountain around them? Femrond gets tossed out and starts bawling over the fact he's going to have a normal lifespan like every other race, so I can't say I sympathize with him. Now the two Durins are locked in a heated, melodramatic debate, with Durin's father spouting verbose dialogue instead of getting to the point as usual, while Durin himself gives us clear confirmation how Rings of Power is the greatest insult to Tolkien's legacy ever created.
You speak of greatness for me, but you suffocate in me any ambition, any desire. Forgive me, Father. I was proud and stubborn, and I was wrong.
Forever am I with you, my son, even in anger.
Elrond is as much a brother to me as if he'd been fired in my own mother's womb.
How dare you invoke your mother's memory to defend your decision to betray your own kind?
No, it's you that's betrayed our kind, squandering our future so you can cling to the past.
I've had enough of your disingenuous assertions.
Just like that earlier scene of Elendil dismissing the value of the past in episode 3, this couldn't be more of a blatant potshot against the kind of traditional storytelling that Lord of the Rings embodies. I don't see what else it could be, because in the context of this scene, it makes no sense for Durin to be calling out his father this way. It's this warped mentality that drives so many Hollywood creatives today to take classic stories and create modern reimaginings of them, because in their eyes, those old works were flawed because they didn't push one-sided ideological messages onto their audiences. Rings of Power couldn't be more contradictory to everything Lord of the Rings stood for. Between its obvious racism allegories, insidious assertions that people can't be noble unless they do horrible things for what they perceive to be the greater good, the complete disregard for the accomplishments of the past, which anybody who's actually read Tolkien would know was massively influential in his stories, and worst of all, bastardizing his characters to fit a modern focus group's perception of what makes a strong character, but failing to realize that stripping away their original personalities ends up destroying what made them great and influential figures in the first place. Honestly, I'm not mad how much Rings of Power isn't like Lord of the Rings anymore. It's just pathetic at this point, watching these writers try to claim how this is the story Tolkien never wrote, while also subverting everything that made his writing great and influential in the first place, and making it abundantly clear why they were never in charge of any major projects until now. So, getting back on track, Durin gets stripped of his birthright, which could have been impactful if the conflict between him and his father was set up properly, but as it stands fans, it just comes off as artificial melodrama like everything else in this show. Speaking of which, we cut back to Nori, who wakes up to see that all the trees in the orchard have come back to life, making her realize she was a complete idiot for sending away Discount Gandalf.
I don't understand. How? He fixed it.
Can you believe it, Nor?
I can believe it, because just like I said in my last video, it didn't take any real effort or development for this conflict to get resolved, and I doubt they'll ever bring it up again, unless they need another contrived reason for us to believe Discount Gandalf may be evil, without him doing anything all that bad. So now the Harfoots are completely stocked up on food, and things couldn't be better for them. Which of course makes it the perfect time for Feminem and the Slim Lady gang to show up, because Poppy was stupid enough to leave a basket lying around so anyone could find it. They walk up to the tree he revived and deduce that Discount Gandalf walked to the ridge Discount Bilbo pointed him towards. Nori tries to mislead them, but they decide to be spooky and teleport behind her.
Leave her alone!
You heard her. Off with you now.
Be gone!
I would question why a Harfoot is standing up for one of their own instead of abandoning them as usual, but since this is Nori's father, who's the only other person in this entire tribe who's shown to have one decent trait about them, it's not too far-fetched. The Slim Ladies aren't impressed though, and decide to do something I can't see as anything else but divine retribution. I feel a great disturbance, as though millions of dead Harfoots in the afterlife are now cheering because the bastards who left them finally got their comeuppance. This scene couldn't be more backwards, because they clearly want this to be horrifying, but don't seem to be aware how unsympathetic and deplorable they've made the Harfoots. I was rooting for Feminem's squad to go full scorched earth on the village and all of its inhabitants, because that would be the perfect justice for all the people they left behind, and decided to mock afterwards. Unfortunately, it seemed all of them survived, but I can always hope they'll get them all next time. The show jumps over to the Númenórean camp, and we see Elendil still grieving over the fact his son is totally dead. He sends away his horse because now they're ripping off Brago going to save Aragorn after he nearly drowned, and then Elendil gives us the most rational, believable, and completely understandable line of this entire series.
I should never have pulled the elf on board. I should have left her in the sea where I found her.
Sorry, I just need to hear that again.
I should never have pulled the elf on board. I should have left her in the sea where I found her.
Yes, you should have, Elendil. We all would have been better off. I know he's going to change his mind eventually, but it's still satisfying to hear him say it all the same. Anyway, Guyladriel and Theo finally make it to the camp. They tease for half a second that Bronwyn may be dead, but she turns out to be just fine, and so is Arondir, completing their bland reunion. Guyladriel goes to see Tamriel, who's really not doing a good job concealing her affliction considering she's sitting around wearing a blindfold. Bronwyn's also hovering in the background, and I don't know why because she's always been an herbalist, not a real leader, and the Southlands still have their king, but I'll get to that in a minute.
No one kneels in Númenor.
You are not in Númenor. Neither of you are.
Ah, get it? It's supposed to be clever reincorporation that shows Guyladriel's grown as a person, even though that change came completely out of nowhere, and these two barely have any kind of connection as it is. Elendil wants to pull out and leave a small garrison to protect the survivors, but Tamriel insists they'll return with all of Númenor's forces. You know, the kind of army that would have been very useful to bring to destroy an entire legion of orcs, rather than just 300 measly men. Seriously, if that's all the men you brought, including your Queen's Guard, you deserve to lose. Guyladriel decides to ride back to Lindon and ask Gil-galad for an elven army as well, with totally not Sauron in tow, who's somehow mortally wounded, but can still walk straight and ride a horse just fine. And Bronwyn's people? Oh, they're just going to move to a nearby abandoned Númenórean colony. You know, the one that existed all along when they were looking for a place to fortify against the orcs, but chose to trot back to the rundown village, and ended up losing way more people because that was such a retarded decision. But hey, it sure is convenient for the plot that all these characters were too stupid to go there until now. So the Southlanders see them off, with Theo still holding Guyladriel's sword because she certainly won't need it traveling across 5,000 miles of hazardous terrain, since the writers are just going to teleport them to their destination by the next episode. We're back with the Harfoots now, who are still sifting through the wreckage the Feminem squad left behind. Nori's father tries to cheer her up, but the others shut him down, because, like I've been saying since the beginning, the Harfoots are all terrible people with no aspirational qualities whatsoever. Apparently, he disagrees, because he decides to give a rousing speech that couldn't be more contradictory and completely wrong.
Look, we don't slay dragons, but there's one thing we can do, I warn, better than any creature in all Middle-earth. We stay true to each other.
You need help.
I used to think this guy was just naive, but he may have full-blown dementia. You're talking to the same people who tried to abandon you and your family to die behind you.
No matter how the path winds, or how steep it gets, we face it with our hearts even bigger than our feet.
The only reason I can think of that you'd even care about hearts is by preserving all the internal organs of the dead Halfords you left behind, so you can eat them later, because all of you are such backstabbing, disgusting savages. Somehow, this inspires Nori to go off to save Discount Gandalf, and inspires Poppy and her mom to come with her. We then get this ironic and baffling exchange.
You think Malva Meadowgrass is too proud to admit it? Well, what's the good of living, Sadok, if we aren't living good?
You know, Malva, just once, it would be grand if you weren't right all the time.
He's responsible, isn't he? The big fella.
What precisely do you expect me to do about it?
What you ought to have done at the camp. Take their wheels and leave them.
I know nobody on this show cares about continuity with the books, but they can't even stay consistent with their own story. So they hobble off in awkward fashion, making it very clear two of the actors didn't learn to walk in their prosthetic feet properly. We finally cut to Disa and Durin, pouting over the fact his father punished him for committing treason. And here we see Disa's gone full Lady Macbeth.
It's your father's. He's grown too old, too suspicious. His mind too feeble. His eyes too dim to see that no matter how many crests he hurls to the floor, one day this will be your kingdom.
Are we missing several scenes here? Because it honestly feels like Disa's gone through this whole dark storyline of the king denying her some kind of privilege, and now she sees fit to unseat him from power using his son. We never saw one hint of this personality before, but Durin seems to be fully on board with her scheme to supplant his father and take all the mytho for themselves. I'm not sure what this show is trying to tell me, because the character we're meant to sympathize with now seems to be well on his way to becoming a full-blown power-hungry tyrant. We see Durin's father's closing up the Mithril cavern, and that the leaf that got healed still looks fine, making this Mithril cure no more easier to understand. It turns out a Balrog is fumbling around deep below the mountain, even though Durin's bane isn't supposed to have been awakened until thousands of years later into the Third Age, but whatever, writers don't care about continuity or respecting the lore, you know the rest. We end on Adar and the Dirty Barkeep strutting across their new lands, which they decide to name Mordor, because we all so desperately wanted to know why it was called that. And it turns out some demonic elf and a dirt farmer just started up one day. Thanks guys. So yeah, another filler episode and another massive headache to get through. It's really starting to look like all my scores for the rest of this series are just going to be 1s out of 10s, because as God is my witness, this show barely progresses or develops anything across its hour-long runtimes, and the little it does progress between each episode is packed with issues and doesn't stand on its own as decent writing, much less as a good adaptation of Tolkien's work. Apparently, Season 2 is meant to fix many of these issues, but even if they do fix all the battle scenes or add more characters from the Legendarium, it's not going to change how broken this show is at its core, or erase all the damage this season's done by itself. The only possible way I could see to fix this show is at the beginning of Season 2, Guyladriel wakes up in the middle of Lothlorien, revealing everything we've seen up to this point has been nothing but a bad dream. I know that sounds pretty drastic, but there is literally nothing in this entire show that you can build a good story out of. That's just wishful thinking though, since the same writers responsible for this mess are still attached. And given the fact they seem to be more interested in calling their critics evil than taking any of their feedback to heart, I highly doubt this will be a classic Star Trek or Buffy situation, where their first seasons were pretty rough, but they still laid a solid enough foundation to build towards something great. I guess we'll see by the next episode if Rings of Power can even match up to their first season's finales. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing for myself, and informing everyone who's following along with me if it was all worth it in the end.